Amen. If you happen to be visiting with us via one of the ways we shared this class, we're glad to have you with us, and there may be several even among our number that are tuning in or will at some point. We welcome you as well. We've got several of our young people in the audience, and you might be turning to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, where we've been looking at the collection that Paul had ordered the churches of Galatia and the church at Corinth to take up. And then other churches we find also participated in this collection. And Paul ordered in verse 2 that this giving into the treasury, this laying by in store, was to be done as God had prospered them. So the orders here was for each individual Christian upon the first day of every week to give into the treasury. Paul says, now concerning the collection for the saints. And this giving, as we pointed out last time, was not to be done arbitrarily. Brother Adams mentioned that we need to be thankful for all that God has given us. And when Paul gave these orders, he said, lay by in store as God has prospered. See, this prosperity is based upon what God has done for us. And this word prosperity, as we pointed out, is the idea of how God has benefited us. See, how He has helped us. Whatever it is we're trying to accomplish, it's Him that has nurtured, has helped, has given to us. And so our giving should be based, as these orders were, upon our prosperity. Now, last week we looked at and used as an example throughout the class, there were some, I believe in Africa, that had brought grain before the church, laid it at the church's feet. Their claim was that this is all they had, and they couldn't sell it. And so they brought what they had. I made the statement in reference to that, I hope I have that attitude too. Now, I did not mean when I said that, and I want to clarify this, that I believe it's okay to bring grain. I do not. I think I pointed out in a couple of classes that the approved example that I can read about, what the apostles taught Christians to do was to sell what they had, if they had goods, and convert those goods into funds, and they brought those monies and laid it at the apostles' feet. So that's what I would encourage all Christians to do. But what I was admiring, what I think is admirable, is these attitudes that these brethren had. They weren't claiming, we don't have anything. See, that's admirable to me. Whatever you have, see, to me their only issue would be if they could get that grain converted, see, as the apostles had taught, get it converted into funds and bring those funds. And they claimed, if I understood correctly, Shane and Brandinium has this information, that they, I think, had tried that. They could not sell it, could not find a buyer. And so Jeremy pointed out a good thought would be, that'd be a good opportunity for Christians, wouldn't it, to kick in their generosity. Of course, we're to bear one another's burdens. Galatians chapter 6 says, bear ye one another's burdens. That'd be a good time, wouldn't it, for Christians to come in and buy the grain if they had been prospered as such, and then they could get that converted, get it in the treasury in an authorized way. That's what I would, that's my understanding of what the Scriptures would teach. But we want to feel for our brethren. We don't want to assume that everybody's doing as well as we are, because that is not the case. Now, it'd be naive to think that is the case, and it'd be inconsiderate of others' situations for us to assume that everybody is given out of plenty. Jesus showed us that that's not the case. Sometimes people are given out of all that they have, and he pointed the widow, and when she brought her mite and put it in the treasury, Jesus pointed out there that she had put in more than all those that were given out of their prosperity, given out of their abundance, see? And so God doesn't see things like we do. We need to remember that. But I'm thankful that our young people are in here. Although I'm sure they've heard many of these things, it's good really to be reminded in this area of giving. We want to get off to a good start. And while y'all are young, and as you begin to prosper, that you place the proper attitudes and all in your giving. I'm thankful they're in this class that they can hear these things as well. Now, God who made the worlds, Paul's pointed out, and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshiped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. Everything comes from God. And God prospers us. And this prosperity, this giving that Christians are to do each first day of the week is based upon how God has prospered us. But these aren't all the instructions that he gave. We'd be remiss if you just thought that you just take some money based on your prosperity and you just brought it, laid it by in store. You probably wouldn't be giving properly, because we really second letter. Now here he talked about the prosperity. It ought to be based upon prosperity. But that's not really all that he said. And we see them giving. He encouraged them to continue to give in the second letter, but he brought up some other things about this giving. See? And this informs us that it's much more involved than just laying by in store. One of Rex's requests is just, how should we give? How should we give? Beyond this prosperity that we have. Well, Paul brought up the fact that the Macedonians had given, but guess what? These brethren were in a deep poverty. And Paul pointed out to the brethren at Corinth that although these brethren, these churches, were very poor, in a deep poverty, that they got up a collection, they were given beyond what Paul and them were expecting. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, he started outlaying and showing these brethren the proper way to give. And one thing we need to always keep in mind is that our poverty is no excuse, see, not to give. Churches need to keep that in mind as well. This go for individuals and this would go for churches. He said, I bestow upon you the grace of God, see, that was bestowed upon the churches of Macedonia. See? So churches, although they may be poor, although they may be in a deep poverty, they still ought to meet their obligations toward others. And this is what we can see from the Macedonians. So let's not carry around this attitude of poor me and look at what we have or the lack thereof in this case and feel like we can't help, we can't do anything. Because what we see here, what Paul showed, is that if a person is really determined to give, they can give. That's what we find in their example. The churches of Macedonia were in a deep poverty, and yet Paul points out that they, Paul said, not only did they give as we had hoped, but they first, and he said, gave themselves to the Lord. Now that's a lot of the problem, isn't it, in giving, is sometimes, and I've talked to Christians, I'm sure you have too at different points, that struggled in their giving. There's been a few people here I've talked to, and because they were claiming that they just had a quarter or 50 cents or something like that. And I raised the question, Well, how'd you get here? See? How did you get here? You see? And have you eaten out lately? I started just mentioning things like that, trying to help them see that, oh, you've been prospered. Really what it amounts to is you hadn't given yourself first to the Lord. See, that's really the case a lot of times. See? And then Paul pointed out another principle, that if we are willing givers, then something wonderful happens. It's one of the greatest things to me. I've always admired that about God, about our Father, is that He doesn't expect more of us than what we can do. And this is the case in our giving, because what Paul pointed out, in addition to giving as we've been prospered, in addition to understanding that even if you're in a deep poverty, you still can meet your obligations toward God. And if you would first give yourselves to God, see, just make up your mind, what does God want me to do? And then see, let our work-related issues, let our social issues, let even our personal relationships and all those things, they have their place. But let us first and foremost give ourselves to God. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves a living sacrifice unto God, holy and acceptable. Say, that you present yourselves a living sacrifice to God. Let us first give ourselves to God, see, and it'll help us in our giving. But this wonderful thing I was referring to, Paul says, for if there is first, in verse 12 of 2 Corinthians 9, if there is first a willing mind, it is accepted according to what one has, and not according to what he does not have. And many times that's the problem with people who struggle in their giving, see, is they're worrying about what they don't have. But God has really taken that out of the equation, see. If we first are determined and willing to do what He's asked of us, see, then it is accepted according to what one has, see. Just do what you can. Give what you have, see. And of course, again, this is based upon His prosperity, see. And so, young people, give as prospered, correct? See, no matter how poor you are, you might be in a deep poverty, you can still give. And first and foremost, give yourself to God. See, this is what the Macedonians did. See, give themselves to God first. And then be willing, see, to do what God has required of us. If there is first a willing mind, it is accepted, see, according to what one has, not based upon and not according to what he does not have, see. And isn't that amazing that He will accept what we have if we have the right attitude? See, be eager to give, willing to give, desirous to do what give ourselves to God. Be dedicated to what He has asked us to do. This is how the Macedonians got this big collection up, see, beyond what Paul was even expecting out of them. See, is these attitudes. That's what we'll find throughout our lives is that God will provide what we need to do what He's required of us. And incidentally, that's one of the principles that go along with our giving. He mentions a little later in this second letter, see, is that God will provide what we need to do what He's asked us to do. See? And so this notion, see, that you can't give because you have to take care of your family, that's backwards, isn't it? You see. Our families aren't, and Jesus pointed this out emphatically, they're not to be placed above the kingdom. They're not to be placed above His lordship. See, nothing is. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, see, and then He will help us. See, then He will help us. So this idea that Paul shows through the Macedonians that they were first, they gave themselves to the Lord, Paul said. That's how they pulled it off. And we can pull off a lot in our lives if we'll do that. Put God first. See, we don't build our giving after we've spent on clothing, after we've bought our groceries, after we've gone and done our secular things. And then we come in to the assembly and God gets the scraps. God gets the leftovers. See, that's all quite contrary, really, to what he's pointed out here in these instructions. He did not at all want that kind of giving. Now, you don't have to go any further than just looking back under what we can see in the Old Covenant. Malachi covered this idea pretty extensively, really. Even under the old law, God didn't want the scraps or the leftovers. It didn't fly. And God rejected their giving based upon how they were bringing the lame, see, he would say, things that were stolen, see, and bringing it and offering it up to God, see. And in effect, that's what we'd be doing when we spend, we eat out, we go buy gas, we do things to sustain ourselves. Well, we go, we spend, entertain ourselves, and then we look around and now we're broke, and then we're wondering, where's God's at? We start hunting some money to put into treasury. See, that's backwards. And so y'all can get off to a good start, young people. Redirect that idea and give God His off the top. That's really what's taught in the Scriptures, that the kingdom is to be placed first and foremost, see, in all that we do. See, we got some ball players here. Well, give God His first. Never put a ball game. See, never put social activities ahead of God. That's the scraps. That's bringing the leftovers to God, see. And if you're going to tie up, I tell Rod this all the time, if you're going to tie up all this energy getting ready for a ball game, we want to see that same and more energy getting ready for services. I mean, don't hustle till you you're just really fired up and ready on these secular things. And then you drag in, say, God, get the scraps, the leftovers, our energy, our alertness, all that goes toward these school activities, toward ball, toward music, and then God get the leftovers. There's a problem with that. Paul's pointing that out here as he's talking about, now, we got to help these brethren at Jerusalem. I want all y'all to participate in this, particularly these Gentiles, is what we see, it seems like. Others could have. I wouldn't see anything that other churches wasn't helping out, but I know he wanted these Gentiles, brethren, because they owed this, he said. They were the debtors of the Jews because the Jews had helped them learn the gospel, learn the truth, had partook of their spiritual things, Paul put it. And we need to help them. And he didn't want this helping done just arbitrarily, left over, scattered, just get up what you got left over after you done everything else. It was just the opposite, really. See, that it would be done based upon their prosperity. And it was to be done every first day of the week. See, this regular, ongoing, routine giving. See, and this giving was to be done with a willing mind. It was to be done first, give yourselves to God, see. Now, not sure what the Corinthians' prosperity level was, if they're struggling in a deep poverty or what. That didn't matter to Paul, did it? What he showed is that each Christian was ordered to give. Rich, poor, see, social standing, irregardless. He wanted it given based upon the prosperity of each Christian. See. Any questions or comments or anything along those lines? Because this giving wasn't to stop here. Let's look, if you would, at 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And what we're pointing out here now, this in 1 Corinthians 16, when he's ordering this weekly collection and giving, and we find out that funds are to be allotted to help the brethren at Jerusalem, and then he points out these various principles, commandments that they were to follow in this giving. See, it's important, see, that we acknowledge these things. Now, it's said in a few words, but he points this out. The Macedonians did that. Not only did the Macedonians give themselves to God, but Paul said they gave themselves to us. See? What Paul said as an apostle needed to be followed. When he would send Timothy and them into town, when he'd send Titus into town, see, they had the authority, see, from these apostles, from men like Paul that would send them out, that had authority, see, to send men out. They were helpers of Paul. And churches were to listen to them. See, when they got these letters, you couldn't take that letter and just cast it aside as if it's something Paul said. See, because Paul said, if any man be a prophet or think himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things that I write are the commandments of God. The Macedonians understood that. They gave themselves to Paul. They gave themselves to God, but they gave themselves to Paul. Wanted to make that point because in verse 5 of chapter 8 he says, and not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. We need to give ourselves to Paul. We need to give ourselves to the apostles and what they say. And we want to acknowledge that what they say are the commandments of God. That these things aren't to be taken lightly and cast aside at all. But in 2 Corinthians 9, as he's detailing this giving and the ways he wanted them to give, he mentions something else about this giving. And he said that in verse 6, he says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So what does that tell us? That the giving was not only as God has prospered, But he wanted you to really understand that really give if you can. See, just really give plenty. It's important. It's that important to give plenty. And he points this out by sharing with them, see, this principle. Paul says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. So, some don't prosper because they don't share and give bountifully. Isn't that what this says? That he who sows sparingly shall reap sparingly. Isn't that pointing out that we want to, one way we can really help ourselves is to give the way we ought to. See? Right? More blessed to give, Jesus said, than to receive. But this giving was to be done bountifully, because Paul warned, see, that this, if you sow sparingly, he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly, but he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Some have pointed out that this is God given to the people who are give. Think about that, Years ago, I always remember that because I thought it was so. We've had some hard workers here at this church through the years. But one of the guys that have always stood out is Sid Rowe. When Sid was young, man, he, like Brother Sutton told me one day, he said, just get Sid to do it, He said, get Sid to do it. Get Sid to do it. Find Sid. Get Sid. And I thought, well, what's the? He said, now, Rodney, remember this. If you want to get something done, find a busy person, right? Ain't that true? See, want to get something done, find somebody covered up. They'll get it done. That's why they covered up. And I always thought that was, special. I always remembered that and tried to observe that and learn that. I found that to be true. I see that in this principle here. See, he who sows sparingly shall reap sparingly. These that scrounge in their giving, in their sowing, this sparingly, they'll reap what comes from it sparingly. But then here's somebody that sows bountifully, and Paul says you'll reap bountifully. God will help you in your giving and whatever you're doing. But this, see, was to drive, this is because he's wanting this collection taken up. And then he says that this giving was not to be haphazard or just something you conjured up on the way to church, or once you got here in the pews and you start reaching and looking for some change or a buck or something you had left over, or something, just whatever was in your wallet. He said really, he didn't want that at all. He said he wanted this giving to be done with purpose. See? Purposeful giving. As one had determined in his heart. See? So there needs to be some planning, doesn't it? Needs to be some forethought into this giving. Well, you really couldn't give as you've been prospered if you just retch kind of in your wallet without any thought at all and just pulled out some funds. If you pulled out all you had, you still didn't give properly. You still, this was to be done with purpose. See, as one purposes in his heart, as one has determined in his heart. And I thought that was interesting. I took time, let me read to you a few translations of this verse. The New International Version says, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. The New Living Translation says, you must each decide in your heart how much to give, and don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. The King James Version says, every man according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity. God loves a cheerful giver. The New American Standard said each one must do just as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And then Young's Literal says, each one according as he doth purpose in heart, not out of sorrow. And that's really an idea that's in that text. If you look at the language, at the words, see. Some people give, they're sorry they gave. They start second guessing. They should have kept, they got stuff to do. They got other things to do. You sit there and you wonder, I may need that next week. You know, I'm going to need this maybe on Monday. I forgot. That kind of giving. You're sorry that you gave. You see, that is a no-no. That's a no-no based on this text. And so here, Young says, not out of sorrow or out of necessity, for a cheerful giver doth God love. And I like this one. It's isn't typically a reliable translation, but look at the contemporary English version. Each of you must make up your own mind about how much to give. But don't feel sorry that you must give, and don't feel you are forced to give. God loves people who love to give. That's really the idea. They hit it on the head in that. That's really the idea. See? Don't be sorry that you gave. See? And don't feel like you're forced to give. See? His commandment is staring you in the face, boy, week after week after week after week, and you're sitting there and you start begrudging it. And, man, you know, each week, you know, God, what does God think? You know, I got stuff to do. That idea. Weekly? See? And you start to begrudge it, feel sorry about it. See? Don't do that. Fight that. Fight that temptation. See? And then he points out in chapter 9 here, as we've been in 2 Corinthians, but he says that we want to give cheerful. We all know what that is, isn't it? You know, right? Cheerfully, happily. See? We want to be glad to do it. Thankful that we can do it. Those are the attitudes we want to have in our giving. See? Thankful, happy, cheerful, joyful, glad to be helping out in the Lord's cause. Glad to be helping out, see, men that preach the gospel. Thankful, glad to be helping saints. We know they're poor, and God has helped us. God wants us to share with them, and we're glad to do it. You can't beat us here. We want to give that bad. We want to do our part. That's what you see. He pointed out that when he wrote to Rome about this same collection, said it pleased those of Macedonia and Achaia to help out. See, that's the way we want to give. That's the way churches ought to give. Now you might notice some of these instructions are for churches. See, the elders would want to keep these things in mind as we give, as they give on our behalf. See. that we want to give cheerfully, whatever we do. You might notice this church here, he says, therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you, that's the church, ahead of time, and prepare your generous gift, that's the church, beforehand, which you, the church, had promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. Church. So they don't need to begrudge it. As a collection, we want to be givers. We want to be willing to share what we have. So that's why, we support preachers. We've supported other efforts. We support, like the effort we're doing with Pat. We want to be glad to do that. See, not write that check every week thinking what all this we could be doing with it, but we want to help, don't we, when we can. See, and share and give properly. But then he talks about this on an individual level. He didn't want this giving grudging either, because we see that he says now, so let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity. See, so the church shouldn't begrudge it, and the individual shouldn't begrudge it. Nobody should begrudge it. You see, we want to be thankful that we can help. We always want to be willing to help, share what we have on a collective level and on an individual level, is what he's pointing out here. And be glad to do it when we do it. And then verse 8, and here's what Christians forget a lot of, and I mean it's often forgotten. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. God will help us do everything He requires of us if we'll do our part. God is able to make all these graces abound toward us, see. He'll help us, whatever our work is. You help these brethren over here. You got a radio program, you really wanting to pull it off. God is able to help you with that, see. Don't begrudge. Don't wonder when you're doing good things. God will help us accomplish all that we can. And we need to bring that into our giving, don't we? See? And that's why, and again, if all you have is a quarter, we've showed God will accept that and it'd be perfect. You put in more than all of us. If you gave out of your poverty and you gave all that she had, like the widow did, God will accept that quarter. But you run in here pulling out change when it's the leftovers and the scraps, God forbid. That's the point. Brother B.
Brother Rodney, we know as Christians that our attitude has everything to do with anything we do as a Christian. It's that way with giving. You're talking about being cheerful. One person might say, well, we need to give enough that it hurts. Another person might say, well, no, we don't need to do it that way. We need to give till it feels good. We know that we're doing good, we know we're doing right, we know we're doing what we're supposed to do, and that's the joy in our giving. You're enough that you feel good about it.
That's a good point. Appreciate that, Brother Byron, isn't it? That's really right. We stay away from this idea of somehow it's hurting us, slowing us down, anything along those lines. Let's be cheerful in our giving. See? Give till it feels good. Byron's saying, see? Really share what you have. Churches should do it. Individuals should do it. Anybody else? Did I overlook a hand or anything? Ellen is a poet. I don't know if y'all know that, but she writes poetry. And this, as we talked last week, she handed me She says, there is no acceptable, unwilling service to God. It's a good sentence sermon. No acceptable, unwilling service to God. That's right. And it don't matter how much we give. If we don't want to give and we're not giving cheerfully, it won't matter. That ought to be crystal clear. God doesn't see like we see. See, men can't read the hearts. You might begrudge, like Christians. Peter warned, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. You have folks over and then you talk, you can't, all the way out and all the way in, you're talking about them, this right here, ugh, can't wait till they leave. It's just a big old, say, well, why you happen? See, be hospitable without murmuring, without grumbling. Do what we do cheerfully, thankfully, glad to help, willing to help. See, God will accept it. Now, we know that in this same letter, 1 Corinthians 13, we know, and I don't know if there's a clearer verse, but Paul says, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. So we can take that to the bank now. It's not going to count. See, if it's not done in love, if it's not done with the proper motive. Later in this chapter 16, Paul says, let all that you do be done with charity, be done with love. Everything we do ought to be motivated by a genuine concern for what we do and for God and His people. Appreciate y'all's participation and appreciate your time this morning.